The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 7, Part 5. Sharp pains leapt from one joint to another, and wherever my body came into contact with that couch of stone, it seemed as if 1,000 needles pricked my flesh. Half crazed by the ever increasing agony, I tossed from side to side like one in delirium. At times, I sat up to escape from the stupefying dizziness which caught me in its swift and circling whirl. My heated pulse beat at the thin walls of my temple until it seemed as if I should go mad. A rushing, sogging, gurgling sound of many waters roared in my ears, while strange, fantastic forms in lines of fire on inky background flitted to and fro before my eyes, until I began to fear I should soon be doomed to sit in eternal gloom like Beni Aga himself. And now heat and cold held alternate sway within my tired and broken frame. Vainly I strove to wet my parched lips with my tongue. The fever had dried it to a chip. For a few brief moments, the torture ceased. I breathed more freely. My limbs, thought I, are getting used to this couch of stone. I shall fall asleep and forget my sufferings. But no, with redoubled fury they came back to their work. I dared not cry out so soon to Beniaga for mercy, for release from the cruel conditions he had imposed upon me. Rather death than yield so quickly, shrink so like a coward who stands motionless and trembling on the battlefield as a spent ball strikes his breast. I slept at last, but oh, what a broken, fevered sleep it was. A sleep with unclosed eyes full of dark and dismal sights. I could stand no more. I yielded, and I longed for death. In thought, I kissed my parents' hands and felt their soft caresses on my brow and face. And then it seemed the gracious Baroness, my mother, caught my hand in hers and pressed it fervently to her lips. The kiss was so warm, so tender, so lifelike, that I started up like one awakening from a long delirium. "It cannot be a dream," I murmured. "I am awake." Tossing my racked form over on its side so that I could touch my right hand, the one on which I had felt the kiss, with my left, the mystery was explained. It was Bulger. He was beside my couch of stone. It was he who had licked my cold, numb hand and turned my thoughts homeward. I caressed his head and ears and sought to make him lie down lest the rustle might disturb the blind hermit. He refused to obey, although I thrice let him know my wishes. It was his first act of disobedience, and for an instant drove all thoughts of pain from my mind. To all my suffering now came this new grief. Aroused from my stupor at last by his persistent refusal to obey, I collected my thoughts sufficiently to realize that he was bent upon leaping on my couch. His forefeet were already resting upon its edge. I dared not resist, lest he should break the solemn stillness of Beniaga's cave by giving vent to some sound of entreaty. No sooner had he sprung upon the rocky shelf than I felt him crouching on its edge, and reaching down as if in the act of seizing something in his teeth, something so heavy, too, that it called for violent exertion. Whatever it was, I was not slow in discovering that he was endeavoring to drag it upon my rocky couch. Half rising, I stretch out my hand to solve the mystery. Oh, beloved Bulger! In an outburst of affection, I pressed my lips repeatedly upon his body. He took no note of my caress, but only tugged the harder at the thing he held within his teeth. It was a blanket. Taught in his early years to fetch my slippers, my gloves, my cap to me when he found them lying here or there, he had never forgotten to render me these petty services. And thus, noticing that my blanket had apparently been forgotten, he seized it, heavy as it was, and dragged it to his little master's bed. Regardless of Beniaga's ire, unmindful of the fact that to accept Bulger's gift was plainly an open breach of the compact between the blind hermit and me, I wrapped my bruised and aching body in the thick, warm covering and fell into a long, refreshing sleep. Such was my first night in Beni Aga's cave. The next day was bright and clear, and the rocky chamber seemed less dismal to me. My eyes were becoming accustomed to the gloom. From morn till night I shunned the bed of torture, passing my time studying out the hidden meaning of the words which Beni Aga had carved on the rocky walls, watching the birds as they flitted in with food for their nestlings, or standing near the blind hermit with my gaze riveted upon his noble features, thick, clustering hair, and far-flowing beard. From this time forth all went well. I soon forgot the long hours of that terrible night of silence and despair. Indeed, I was astonished to find how swiftly the time sped along when one gives himself up to deep and all-absorbing meditation. Nights and days flitted by like alternate hours of light and darkness. I was startled from a deep sleep by hearing the full, round voice of Beni Aga saying, "Up, up, little traveler, up! My son, the morn is breaking. The appointed hour has come. Today we must enter Palin Matalan, or all thy apprenticeship shall have been in vain." I sprang up, and approaching Beni Aga, related in tones of unfeigned grief how I had disregarded the sacred compact between us, and that, although it cut me to the heart to be obliged to turn back, when I stood upon the very confines of the great gloomy forest, yet I was not worthy to follow him, and was firmly resolved not to plead for mercy. I told him all, how my frame had been so racked by pain that I was upon the very point of crying out for release from the terrible compact, when my beloved Bulger came to my relief and saved me from that degradation. He heard me in silence, his noble countenance giving no sign or hint of what was going on within that lofty soul. At last a sad and almost imperceptible smile spread over his face, and he spake as follows: "Take heart, my son. All is forgiven. Thou art but a child, and I should have lightened the burden of this apprenticeship. Nor can I hold thee worthy of blame for yielding to such a touching proof of thy dog's love for thee. Hadst thou repulsed him, he would have lain in wakeful sorrow by thy bedside all that night. Dear faithful soul, would he belong to me!" So saying, Beni Aga bent his towering form and caressed Bulger's head and ears. Nor was Bulger slow in returning the hermit's caresses. They had become the best of friends. Bulger felt the fascination of Beni Aga's mysterious power from the very first. When the hour arrived for us to leave the rocky chamber of gloom and silence and step out into the sunlight once more, my heart broke out into its old-time beat. Had I not been in the presence of the venerable Beni Aga, I should have leapt and danced for joy as we emerged from that dreary abode, and I felt the warm air fan my cheek once more. But one thing struck me now most forcefully. It was the wonderful change which I noted in the blind hermit himself, when he stood in the sunlight, and the morning breeze tossed the curls of his white silken hair like April winds, making merry with a flock of snowflakes. First, his appearance was quite different from that to which I had become accustomed. A leathern cap crowned his massive head and held his thick, rebellious hair somewhat in control. His wide, flowing beard had entirely disappeared beneath his rude garb, save where it clothed his face and neck. I saw at once that he was clad for work, for toilsome progress through the Palin Matalan's thick growth. In his right hand he carried a curious rod or wand, long, slender, polished, and extremely flexible. I soon learned to wonder at his extraordinary skill in using this staff to guide his steps or discover the nature of any object not within the reach of his hands. A rude pouch or leather bag was swung across his shoulder. The change in Beni Aga's manner was still more noticeable. To me, this change was as pleasing as it was unexpected. In a brief half-hour, he became another man. His deep, rich voice, soft and round as the sound of an organ pipe, took on a mellower tone. A faint smile wreathed his noble features as the sunlight fell upon them. His step became quick and elastic, his movements brisk and agile. So wonderfully keen were his remaining senses that only the closest observer would have guessed that he was blind. Turning in the direction of the spot where his dogs were at play, he startled me by breaking out into a joyous, "Ho, ho, my children! Yo ho, my brothers! Here to me, here to me!" His dogs, Bulger among them, bounded forward with a loud chorus of barking. Bene Aga caught the stranger's voice. "It pains me deeply," he cried, "to rob him of his playfellows, for I see him gambolling and sporting with my children." As the blind hermit stooped, his dogs, with loud cries of sorrow at parting, sprang up to lick his face and hands. "Go, my children, go, my brothers," said Beni Aga. "Content yourselves. I'll come again soon, very soon, with love warmed by absence." All was now ready for the start. Beneath the rising sun, I could see a long, dark line far away, where earth and sky came together. It was Palin Matalin, home of darkness, the great, gloomy forest. Thither Beni Aga now directed his footstep with astounding rapidity of gait, tapping the ground with his long, polished wand as he hurried along. Awestruck, I followed my blind guide. In comparison with such miraculous powers of hearing, smelling, and feeling, my eyes were worthless. Ever and anon he called out to me, "Guard thee well, my son, a viper stirred in the grass to thy left. Guard thee well, my son, to touch the leaves of the flowering shrub through which we are passing now. They are poisonous. Guard thee well, my son, to taste the waters of the rivulet to which we are coming, until I have made trial of its purity. Guard thee well, my son, to pluck one of the flowers which now delight thy eye, and charm thee with their odor. 'Tis next to death to breathe their perfume close to thy nostrils. Guard thee well, my son, to crush upon thy skin one of the little insects which now fill the air, lest thou spread a subtle poison o'er thy flesh." As we drew near to the outer edge of the great, gloomy forest, a strange joy lit up Beni Aga's face. He beat the air with his polished wand in graceful curves and circles as he poured forth, half singing, half reciting a sort of chain, invocation, or mysterious greeting to Palin Matalin, home of darkness. As if charmed by the rich music of his own voice, his spirits ran higher and higher. At times he halted to catch the soft echoes as they came floating back on the wings of the morning air. As nearly as I can remember, Beni Aga's chant was something like this. "O la 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 la, hail to thee, Palin Matalin, shadowy land. La la lu la lo li lu la lo li. We are coming to thee, beloved temple of silence and gloom. Let us into thy dark corridors, Palin Matalin, lo illa, lo illa. Thou art victor, Palin Matalin, my beautiful. From thy buckler of darkness fall the sun's arrows, splintered and broken. Oh, la, 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 la. We are coming, King of gloom and stillness, Palin Matalin. O silent domain, let us in from the road and the glare. Let us in from the roofless world. We are near at hand, Palin Matalin. Swing open thy black portals, lift thy veil of gloom, admit thy children into thy silent chambers. O Palin Matalin, lo illo, lo illo, lo illo, lo illa. At At last we stood by the very edge of Palin Matalin. Beniaga swept his polished wand against the foliage of one of the low-hanging, far-reaching branches, then sprang forward and, seizing a handful of the leaves, crushed them in his grasp and raised them to his nostrils. "This is not the gateway, my son," he cried. "We must turn farther northward." After about half an hour, he again halted and reached out for a handful of the leaves, inhaled their odor. Not yet," he murmured. "Somewhat northward still. Be not troubled, my son. Thou seest Palin Matalin with thine outward eye. Not so Beniaga. He must lay his hand upon the very walls of this temple of silence and gloom ere he can see it." Suddenly the blind hermit paused. His thin nostrils quivered. His massive breast heaved convulsively. "We are almost there," he spoke in measured tones. "I catch the perfume of the foliage which clothes the two ebon columns of the gateway." I looked and saw before me two towering trees, whose wide-reaching branches swept the very ground. Side by side they stood, alike in size and grandeur. Beniaga passed his hand caressingly over the first branch, which brushed his cheek and pressed its leaves to his lips, then broke out into his wild chant once more. I stood looking at the blind hermit and listening to his song of greeting, hardly knowing what to expect next, when, suddenly, he threw himself upon his knees and crept under the far-reaching branches of one of these gigantic sentinels of the great gloomy forest. Bulger and I followed. Thus it was that we entered the domain of Palin Matalin, home of darkness. I shall not try to describe to you the solemn stillness, the mysterious twilight of the great gloomy forest, nor to paint for you the wonderful beauty of the deep green mosses which covered rocks and trees, trailed from the swaying branches carpeting the floor, or hung like heavy canopies from tree to tree above our heads, and increased the gloom caused by the thick interlacing foliage. I had followed Beniaga's noiseless footsteps about a half a mile into the stilly depths of Palin Matalin when I began to feel a strange chill creep over me, beginning at my very fingertips and pursuing its insidious way toward my very vitals. So rapidly did it run its benumbing course that I was upon the point of calling out to Beniaga when he halted, and having broken a twig from a tree with foliage of dark green and polished leaves, bade me eat them, saying, "Palin Matalin does no harm to those that know him." And we're going to pause here, and we'll continue in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Hope you're enjoying the story. Love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.